If you have not heard, President Biden is seeking $24 million to send to Ukraine. Thinking about all the billions that has gone to Ukraine over the past year and a half. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I want to be very clear here. I am not here to say that people in Ukraine should suffer. No, I feel for the people there that are having to go through all of this. I feel for the people in Russia that are having to go through all of this. But it is very important to understand that at this point in time, that they cannot win this war. And our government is showing you that they're not winning because they continue to send them money and weapons. That right there lets you know that they're losing this battle. And I'm going to show you a recent clip from CNN where they actually admit this, I think for the first time. But the American people at home are left to suffer and struggle. So we'll get into this here. Biden seeks $24 billion for Ukraine, testing bipartisan support in Congress. So here we go. President Biden asked Congress to approve about $40 billion in additional spending on Thursday, including $24 billion for Ukraine and other international needs, $4 billion related to border security, and $12 billion for disaster relief. Now, who is experiencing disaster right now? That would be like Hawaii, right? East Palestine, Ohio. Notice how disaster relief is last. Ukraine is first. And notice the difference in the dollar amount. Why is our government willing to spend more money abroad than on its own people right here? What could we have done with all the billions of dollars that have gone out the door to Ukraine? And by the way, it's not just the dollars, it's not just the weapons. When we talked about individual packages that have been sent to Ukraine over time, one of those packages also included healthcare. But they won't even give everyone in this country healthcare. One of those packages included clean drinking water, but they won't give everyone in this country clean drinking water. We have to call this out for what it is. This is just a money laundering scheme. Our government knows that Ukraine cannot win this. Their goal is to remove Vladimir Putin as leader of Russia, implementing regime change. Their goal is to support the military industrial complex. There's a lot of money to be made here. But let's not sit here and pretend like the U.S. government really cares about the people who are suffering in Ukraine. If there was no money to be made here, this would not be happening. And more people need to call it out for what it is. A senior administration official said the needs were great, and the White House was hopeful an agreement could be reached with Congress on the request, which covers only the first quarter of the current 2024 fiscal year. But the request could face opposition in Congress, where some far-right Republicans, especially those with close ties to former President Donald Trump, want to pare back the billions in assistance and Washington has sent to Kyiv since Russian troops invaded in February 2022. Notice how they mention the opposition is coming from some far-right Republicans. Notice they don't mention that there's any opposition coming from the squad, because the squad has voted for legislation to send money to Ukraine. This should be very telling and letting you know exactly where the Democratic Party is headed. Trump, the front runner in the race to be the Republican presidential nominee in 2024, has been sharply critical of the U.S. support for Ukraine in the war. And 70 House members backed an unsuccessful proposal in July to cut funding for Ukraine. Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said there was strong bipartisan support in the Democratic-led Senate for doing more to back Ukraine, help Americans affected by natural disasters, and fight the scourge of fentanyl. Notice again, even with Chuck Schumer, Ukraine comes first, we come last. The latest request from the Biden administration shows Americans' continued commitment to helping Americans here at home and our friends abroad, and should send a clear signal to Vladimir Putin, the Chinese government, and others of America's resolve when it comes to defending democracy around the world. That's coming from Chuck Schumer. The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said in a statement he looked forward to reviewing the request to make sure it is necessary and appropriate to keep America safe, secure our borders, support our allies, and help communities rebuild after disasters. Notice it's always after the disasters, not help them during, huh? McConnell has strongly supported assistance to Ukraine, saying that much of the money is spent in the United States and citing the importance of the democratic world unifying against aggression, whether from Russia or China. Boy, they kill me. When asked about criticisms from Republicans in the House of Representatives that the request violated a budget deal reached in June, the official said it was clear when that deal was signed that it did not preclude requests for emergency funding. There's work to do, but we are hopeful about our ability to come together. First, Ukraine requests since Republicans took House. Republicans narrowly control the House, where Speaker Kevin McCarthy signaled in June that any request for more assistance for Ukraine would face an uphill path through Congress. A spokesperson for McCarthy said he would review Biden's proposal. A Republican-led House will not rubber stamp any blank check funding requests. Rather, the administration's emergency funding requests must be reviewed and scrutinized on their merits, consistent with the practice and principles of our majority. The House and the Senate last approved aid for the Kiev government, $48 billion in December, before Republicans took control of the House. Where is all this money going? Our Pentagon can't pass an audit. Where's the spreadsheet of how this money is spent? Why did certain Democrats vote against that? Vote against some type of accountability so that the American people, so that you could see how your tax dollars are being spent. Where is this money going? A second administration official said the United States was making good on its promise to stand by Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion that began in February 2022 and would not be bashful about asking for additional funds if needed. The funding request also includes $3.3 billion to expand development and infrastructure, leading by the World Bank to developing countries and provide a credible alternative to China's corrosive and unsustainable leading and infrastructure projects. World Bank, China, $3.3 billion. Why are we helping another country expand their development and their infrastructure when we have roads and bridges falling apart in our own country? Right? This is an economic issue, and the economic issue is China. The US government doesn't like how far China has come economically. They don't like the fact that China is growing beyond their control. And they really do not like the fact of the idea that there's a possibility of another superpower other than the United States. There's actually a doctrine that is against it. It's called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which basically says that there should be no other superpower other than the US. But they're sending them money to help them build their infrastructure and development. and Hawaii's on fire. Look how long it took to rebuild New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. I want people to pay attention to what's really happening here. When they tell you they don't have money for healthcare, that's a damn lie. When they tell you they don't have money to make lunch free for kids at public schools, that's a lie. In fact, some states have already passed that. They have the money to do those things. They have the money to make sure that no one goes hungry in this country. But their money goes towards war. All the billions and billions of dollars going out the door. The request includes $13.1 billion for the Department of Defense, including $9.5 billion for equipment for Ukraine and replenishment of U.S. equipment stocks already sent to Kiev. It also includes $3.6 billion for continued military, intelligence, and other defense support. It seeks $8.5 billion for the Department of State and U.S. Agency for International Development, including $7.3 billion for economic, humanitarian, and security assistance for Ukraine and other affected countries and populations. $1 billion to strengthen strategic partnerships in developing countries, $200 million to strengthen African countries' resistance to Russia's Wagner Group. Listen to this, see? Resistance, which Washington has designated a transnational criminal organization. All this money just going out the door. $7.3 billion for humanitarian assistance. People need humanitarian assistance right here in this country. They don't have money for that, though. Among other things, the package asks for $2.65 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, including $2.2 billion for border management operations, shelter and services for migrants released from DHS custody, and $416 million for counter fentanyl activities. Let me show you something right here real quick. $2.2 billion for border management operations, shelter and services for migrants released from DHS custody. But they refuse. This money is wasted. Let me tell you why. If you're not trying to fix the core problem, which is fixing those countries that the U.S. government destroyed, which is the reason why those people are coming here in the first place. If they're not trying to fix that, if they're not trying to give resources back to if they're not trying to give resources back to those countries, if they're not trying to give jobs back to those countries, if they're not trying to rebuild those countries that they destroyed and took everything from, this money that they're using to help the border management operations and to shelter migrants is just a Band-Aid on a wound that is going to continue to reopen. That's not going to end. People will continue to come because their countries have been destroyed by us. So that $2.2 billion will continue. That'll be a continual problem. $2.2 billion to shelter and services for migrants released from DHS custody. They have money. They're showing you they have money to pay for shelter. Are they giving you shelter? Think about it. Think about it, folks. Think about all the people you know that have been evicted. All the homeless people out in the street. People who can't afford to pay their rent, especially after the pandemic and they lost their jobs. All the people who were kicked off of unemployment under Joe Biden, by the way. Where's the $2.2 billion to help shelter people in this country? Where is it? I want to be very clear, and some people can take this the wrong way. I 100% understand why people are coming here. But something that I have noticed is that I feel like the US government, the Biden administration, they're willing to help the migrant populations, not because they care about those people. Because if they cared about those people, they wouldn't continue to destroy their countries in the first place. They're willing to help shelter them because they want cheap labor. Kamala's not going to tell you that. Joe Biden's not going to tell you that. Nobody in the Democratic Party is going to tell you that and admit that to you. They want cheap labor. All of these labor strikes that have risen up around the country the past 2 years, you think they like that? No, they don't want you going on strike. Look at how they interfered with the railroad workers trying to go on strike. They realize the American people are becoming more frustrated and want a living wage and want a decent life. Now, the easy response would be just to give you a living wage, but they can't have that. Why would they do that when they can just pay people less who are willing to do the work for less? So this is a labor issue. And when people bring up the border and people talk about everybody's coming here, you make sure you bring it right back to the international perspective, and you bring it back to the fact that these people's countries have been ruined and destroyed. That's why they're coming here. Then, two, you make sure you mention why the Biden administration is willing to help them as much as they can, because they want the cheap labor. They want the people to keep cutting their lawns. All the rich people in Southern California and in San Francisco and all these bougie places across this country, they want to keep employing people to be their housekeepers, to cut their lawns and shit. They know majority of Americans, we're not doing those jobs. And if that means they have to hire you at Kellogg's, if that means that they have to hire them to work for the railroads, if that means that UPS wants to hire them instead of trying to keep the employees that they have who are asking for a raise, that's what they'll do. Got to make sure they have those nannies. If you've ever lived in New York, you could honestly go to Central Park, try to do it Monday through Friday in the afternoon, and you just see like a slew of nannies. All these rich people, all these nannies. And not all of them were legal. So think about that. Now, all that money going out the door, but majority of Americans don't approve of it. But it's still happening. And I want to show you this. Majority of Americans oppose more U.S. aid for Ukraine in war with Russia. And I'm just going to show you the numbers here. And that's it. Here we go. Overall, 55% say the U.S. Congress should not authorize additional funding to support Ukraine versus 45% who say Congress should authorize such funding. 51% say the U.S. has already done enough to help Ukraine. 48% say it should do more. I don't know what to tell you, but it's just Americans are waking up to this. And now it has gotten to the point where even CNN's Anderson Cooper had to admit that Ukraine is losing. He has to admit it, because how else can you continue to excuse why we keep giving all this money? Eventually, you're going to have to tell people, yeah, we keep doing this because they're not winning. They're losing. First time I saw this on CNN. Listen to this.
Long before Russian forces invaded, it was understood they outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian forces. So when Ukrainian troops managed early on to roll back a good deal of that invasion force, hopes were initially high they could quickly finish the job. It's not worked out that way. And now, new reporting tonight that there's growing concern among Western allies about Ukraine's counteroffensive and its fate. In a moment, we'll talk to a retired three-star general for his take. But first, the exclusive reporting from CNN's Jim Sciutto, who joins us now. So what are you hearing from your sources about what they believe Ukraine's prospects are right now?
A markedly negative turn, Anderson, and these are sources I've been speaking to since the start of the counteroffensive, but even going back to the start of the war. And expectations of this counteroffensive were quite high going back just a few weeks ago. But in recent weeks, as Ukrainian forces have encountered really intense Russian defenses in the east and the south, 3 lines of defensive lines, defensive belts as they're known, with trenches as you're seeing there, tens of thousands of mines, Ukrainian forces have not proven able to break through those lines. They've encountered staggering losses, I'm told, both in terms of killed in action and wounded in action.
Everybody heard that? They've suffered staggering losses, both killed in action and wounded in action. They have to report it now. They have to tell people now. Let's continue.
And Ukrainian commanders, in response to that, understandably have pulled back some of those units to save some of those casualties. And while even a few weeks ago, the hope was that over time they'd be able to break through, more recently, the assessments both on this side of the Atlantic, but also in Europe, have been that they don't quite see the opportunity. So that hope has faded, not entirely faded, but it has certainly become a much less hopeful outlook for their prospects for success in gaining back significant territory.
But they knew that there was no way. They knew they didn't have a chance. They knew they didn't have a chance. Like, this is so, once again, another war that could have been avoided. Let's remember when they tried to talk about peace negotiations a while back. Could have been avoided, all because you need to feed the war machine. This is embarrassing. And it's not even one of those things cheering on one side or the other. This is just embarrassing. All this money went out the door. I wonder what the American people feel about this. Billions and billions of dollars gone out the door, and they're losing.
Also takes into account, I mean, there were a large number of Ukrainian forces trained for a length of time by U.S. forces in sort of combined weapons tactics and movement. That still has not been able to deal with the trench system, the mining, the defensive system that Russia had time to set up.
No, and what I'm hearing is that the expectations may simply have been too high. When you look at the training for some of these newly supplied Western weapons, for instance, German Leopard tanks, you're seeing maybe 8 weeks of training. That is not a lot of time. And the thinking is, from speaking to military officials, also diplomats, is that the idea of turning Ukrainian armed forces into a capable, credible, mechanized fighting unit in that short length of time may have been a bridge too far. That even with advanced Western weapons and training from the best in the business, right, that the time frame was short, and that even for the best U.S. combat brigades, months, years of training still make it difficult to break through these kinds of lines. So with weeks of training, it just may have been too high a hope.
How long before mainstream media comes forward to tell the truth about this war, like they did with the war in Iraq? Do you remember years later, after the war in Iraq started, they finally came forward and finally admitted that there were no weapons of mass destruction? That we were told a lie, we were sold a lie? How long do you think for this one? 3, 5 years? Because, see, these guys are puppets. Anderson Cooper and this dude to his right, whose name I always forget, these are just puppets. Their strings are pulled by the executives at CNN. The executive strings are pulled by the shareholders like BlackRock and Vanguard. If they weren't puppets, they wouldn't be there. They're doing the bidding of the shareholders. They're telling you exactly what the shareholders want you to hear.
You also mentioned in your reporting that the Western officials fear this slow counteroffensive could cause a gap amongst Ukrainian officials. What's the concern?
Well, you're already hearing it, right? I was in Aspen for the Security Forum just a couple of weeks ago. The Ukrainian president spoke there, and at the time he said, listen, we'd like to have proceeded more quickly, but we didn't get the weapons and the training soon enough, pointing some fire, as it were, at the West for not moving quickly enough to support this counteroffensive. And you're hearing more of that. And the concern is that the unity of the alliance, both among Western partners in NATO, but also with their Ukrainian partners, that a blame game emerges, as one official described it to me. And that's a problem, right? Because unity is important, not just in terms of standing up to Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also maintaining political support, military support, etc. A lot of this is bubbling up under the surface, and the fear is that it bubbles up above the surface and creates divisions that make it more difficult to provide that support going forward.
Jim Sciutto, fascinating reporting. Thank you. And very concerning, obviously.
Notice how he basically admitted that they're blaming the West for not supplying them weapons fast enough to deal with it fast enough, when the U.S. government has been giving them weapons and money for over a year, billions and billions of dollars. So they're starting to bite the hand that feeds them. Okay. You see how this works? You see this? Come on, man. Come on. Let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you, DC says, Joe's a good man bailing out struggling Ukrainian laundromats. Thank you. Shaima says, Janet Yellen herself said that the security and military spending will be prioritized over the actual economy. There you go. Thank you, Perry. The money is being skimmed off and the guns will end up with Al-Qaeda and criminals in the U.S. Some of the weapons have ended up in countries in Africa, too. And thank you, 100 BlackRock, Goldman and Sachs payouts.